Be me, Anne. I guess I should start by saying I'm not proud of how I acted. But to understand the story, you have to understand who I was a few months ago. I was in my third year of college, studying social sciences. My whole world was about theory, about social structures, power dynamics, and a lot of feminist literature. I saw the world through a very specific lens. I believed, and I guess I still do to an extent, that society is structured to benefit men in a lot of ways. The patriarchy, systemic advantages, all that. I wasn't just reading about it, I was living it, or so I thought. I was active in student groups, went to rallies, and my social media was a constant stream of infographics and call-outs. I thought I was doing important work. My brother, Stephen, is 2 years older than me. He's a good guy, I suppose. He works a regular IT job, goes to the gym, plays video games with his friends online. He's not unattractive. He keeps himself clean. He's in decent shape. But he's quiet. Always has been. And he was single. Permanently single. In my mind, with the lens I was using, this just didn't compute. I'd see all these articles and posts about the struggles women face in the dating world, the harassment, the unsolicited pictures, the emotional labor. And I saw men who seemed to put in zero effort and still had girlfriends. So, when I looked at my brother, I saw a problem that needed fixing. I decided his issue was internal. He had to be one of those guys, the ones who secretly resent women for not paying attention to them. An incel in the making. I told him this, by the way. Not in a gentle way either. I was convinced it was a form of tough love. I'd say things like he needed to unpack his privilege, that his passivity was a form of toxicity, that he was waiting for a woman to just fall into his lap without doing any of the work. He never really argued. He'd just get this tired look on his face, shrug, and say he was fine with how things were. That, to me, was the biggest red flag of all. He was checking out, giving up. This all came to a head one evening, probably back in the spring. We were having dinner. My parents were out for their anniversary, so it was just me, Stephen, and one of my friends from college who was just as passionate about these topics as I was. My friend was talking about some guy from one of her classes who was, in her words, aggressively mediocre, but had a new girlfriend every other month. And that set me off. I looked right at Stephen, who was just quietly eating his pasta. I told him that was proof, that the bar for men was on the floor and he couldn't even be bothered to trip over it. My friend nodded eagerly, adding that it was a known fact that dating apps were overwhelmingly populated by men, giving women the ultimate choice. She said it was simple supply and demand. Stephen didn't even look up. He just said he wasn't interested in that stuff. I asked him why not. I demanded an actual reason. He said it looked like a waste of time. He told me he'd rather spend his evening at the gym or playing a game with his buddies than swiping on faces and sending messages into the void. The void. That word really got to me. I accused him of being defeatist. I told him it was only a void because he wasn't trying hard enough. I said his attitude was the problem. He finally looked at me and said that I had no idea what I was talking about. For him, that was the equivalent of a massive outburst. He's not a confrontational person. That's when I had the idea. An experiment. A way to prove, once and for all, that I was right and he was just making excuses. I proposed a bet. I told him he would create a Tinder profile, right then and there. And I would manage it. I would pick his pictures. I would write his bio. I would even advise him on who to swipe on. He had 2 weeks. If, in those 2 weeks, he got a date, just one single date, he had to admit I was right and take me and my friend out to a really nice steakhouse we'd been wanting to try. If he failed, if he got 0 dates in 2 weeks, I would drop the subject completely. For 6 months. No more incel talk, no more lectures, no more advice. He looked at me for a long moment. I could see the appeal of 6 months of silence in his eyes. It was a powerful motivator. He sighed, a deep, long-suffering sigh, and said, "Fine." My friend cheered. I felt this surge of righteous victory. I was going to fix my brother and get a free steak dinner out of it. It was a win-win. We started immediately after dinner. I grabbed his phone and made him sit next to me on the couch. First, the pictures. I went through his camera roll. It was a disaster. A few awkward selfies with bad lighting. Group photos where he was in the background. A picture of him holding a ridiculously large fish he caught with our dad 2 years ago. I physically cringed. I told him this was Exhibit A for why he was single. I explained that his photos needed to show his personality, but in an accessible, non-threatening way. They needed to be high quality. They needed to show him smiling. He said he hated smiling for photos. I told him to get over it. We spent the next hour conducting a full-blown photo shoot. I made him change his shirt twice. We went into the backyard for the golden hour lighting. I had him pose with our dog. I told him that was a classic move, shows you're nurturing. I made him stand against a brick wall trying to get an urban, casual shot. He was so stiff and uncomfortable through the whole thing. He kept saying he felt ridiculous. I told him this was the work. This was the effort he'd been avoiding. In the end, we had 5 usable photos. A clear, smiling headshot. Him with the dog, looking happy. A full-body shot of him in a nice shirt, not looking directly at the camera. A picture of him on a hike we took last summer. I told him it shows he's active. One of the casual brick wall photos. I was pretty proud of them. He looked like a normal, approachable guy. Next was the bio. This was my masterpiece. I deleted his initial attempt, which was something like IT guy. I like hiking and video games. Not sure what I'm looking for. I told him that was the most boring bio in human history. It had 0 personality. I spent 20 minutes crafting the perfect text. It was a work of art from my perspective. It was witty, but not arrogant. It mentioned his job, but in a self-deprecating way. It listed his hobbies, but framed them as passions. I included a line about being a proud feminist ally. I thought that was a brilliant touch. It would signal to all the smart, progressive women that he was a safe, good guy. I also added a question at the end to encourage messages. Something like, tell me the most controversial opinion you have that's not about politics. I read it aloud to him. He just stared at me blankly and said, I would never say any of that. I told him that was the point. He was being sold as a product, and this was good marketing copy. The real him could come out later, on the date that he was definitely going to get. He didn't argue. He just let me post it. The profile was live. Phase 1 of the experiment was complete. Now came the swiping. I sat with him for a while, instructing him. My rules were simple. No swiping right on profiles that were just a blurry group photo or a sunset. No swiping on bios that were just an Instagram handle. He had to look for women who seemed to have a personality, who had written something thoughtful. I was trying to rig the game in his favor, to aim for quality over quantity. He did it for about half an hour, then said he was bored and went to play his computer game. I checked his phone a couple of times over the next few days. He was swiping, maybe a little bit each evening. He wasn't putting in the hours I would have, but he was participating, and nothing happened. By day 4, he had 0 matches, not 1. I was starting to get nervous. I told him he needed to be less picky. I said maybe he should use a super like. He just shrugged and said he was swiping on people he found interesting. On day 5, he got his first match. I was ecstatic. I ran into his room to tell him the news. He opened the app. The girl was pretty, had a normal-looking profile. I began coaching him on the perfect opening message. I told him "hey" was forbidden. He had to comment on something in her profile. Her bio mentioned she liked travel. I helped him write a message asking about the coolest place she'd ever visited. He sent it, and we waited and waited She never replied. After a day, the match just sat there, a monument to our failed attempt at conversation. On day 7, exactly 1 week in, he got his second match. This time, the girl messaged him first. My heart leaped. See? It's working, I thought. The message was a weird link and something about a can't-miss crypto opportunity. It was a bot. So, 1 week down. Half the bet was over. The grand total was 1 ghosting and 1 scam bot. I was genuinely baffled. I couldn't understand it. He had good pictures, a great bio. He was a decent-looking guy. How was this possible? My brain couldn't accept that my theory was wrong. The only other explanation was the user. It had to be Steven's fault. I confronted him about it. I told him he must be doing something wrong. Maybe he wasn't swiping enough. Maybe he was only swiping at the wrong time of day. I accused him of sabotaging the experiment just to prove me wrong and get me to be quiet. He just looked at me and said he was doing exactly what I told him to do. He told me this was why he didn't want to do it in the first place. He said it was soul-crushing. I told him he was being dramatic. This is where my frustration took over. If he couldn't execute the plan properly, I would have to do it myself. I needed a control group. I needed to prove that the strategy was sound. I announced my new plan to him that evening. I was going to create a second profile, a fake one. I would make the ideal man, the kind of guy who, according to all the theories I'd read, should be drowning in attention. If this fake profile succeeded where Steven failed, it would be the ultimate proof that the problem was, in fact, him. His vibe, his lack of effort, something. He just looked at me, shook his head, and said, "Do whatever you want, Anne. I don't care anymore." That was all the encouragement I needed. I spent the next hour on a deep dive online. I needed photos. I couldn't just use a famous actor. I needed someone who was handsome, but believable. I found a fitness instructor from a small European country on Instagram. He had a few thousand followers, not enough to be recognizable. He was tall, incredibly fit, with a great smile and perfect hair. He was objectively a 9 out of 10, maybe even a 10 out of 10. I saved 6 of his best photos, pictures of him on a mountain, one laughing with friends with their faces strategically cropped. A picture of him working out, one in a nice suit. It was the perfect portfolio. I created a new profile. I named him Alex. I made him 25, a couple of years older than me. For the bio, I pulled out all the stops. I made him a graphic designer, creative but stable. I wrote that he had just moved to the city and was looking to explore with a fun partner in crime. I gave him a list of cool, attractive hobbies: rock climbing, learning to play the guitar, trying to perfect a sourdough recipe. I made him sound adventurous, funny, sensitive, and confident all at once. It was a masterpiece of bait. The profile was ready. Alex was born. I set the radius to the max and the age range to 20 to 30. I took a deep breath and started swiping. I didn't even have to be picky. I just swiped right on every profile that looked like a real person. I wanted to see the raw numbers. The effect was instantaneous. It was like opening a fire hydrant. Match, match, match. My phone started buzzing and didn't stop. In the first 10 minutes, Alex had more than 20 matches. After an hour, he had over 99 likes. The little gold number just stopped counting. I felt a dizzying sense of vindication. I was euphoric. I stormed into Steven's room, holding my phone up like a trophy. I showed him the screen, the endless cascade of new matches appearing every few seconds. I told him, "See? See? This is what happens when you have a good profile and a positive attitude. This is what it's supposed to look like." He glanced at the screen, then back at his computer monitor. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't seem angry or defensive. He just seemed nothing. He just said, "Okay, cool." I couldn't believe his non-reaction. I asked him if he understood what this meant. It meant I was right. It meant the problem wasn't the apps or the women on them. The problem was him. He turned to me and said something that, at the time, I thought was just a sour grapes excuse. He said, "You haven't done the hard part yet, Anne." I laughed. The hard part? I had gotten more matches in 1 hour than he had in a week. What could possibly be harder than that? I told him to just wait. I was going to turn these hundreds of matches into a dozen dates. It would be easy. It was just a numbers game, and my numbers were fantastic. I went back to my room, feeling completely triumphant. My experiment was a success. My worldview was validated. My brother was the problem, and I had the data to prove it. I sat on my bed, opened the app, and looked at the wall of new faces. It was time to start a conversation. So there I was, sitting on my bed, phone in hand. Alex had over 100 matches in a single hour. It was a digital flood. I felt like a genius. My theory was proven. All you needed was a good presentation. Now, for the final step, turning this mountain of interest into actual dates. I scrolled through the matches. So many faces. I decided to start with the ones who looked the most promising, the ones with actual bios. The first girl I picked seemed cool. Her profile said she was into indie films and art galleries, a perfect target for the sensitive, creative Alex. I didn't want to just say hey. That was the kind of low-effort stuff I'd been lecturing my brother about. I took my time. I crafted a thoughtful opener. I mentioned a specific director I thought she might like based on her profile and asked for her opinion. It was engaging, it showed I'd paid attention, and it opened the door for a real conversation. I hit send and felt a smug sense of satisfaction. Then I moved on to the next one, a girl whose bio said she loved hiking. I sent her a message asking about a popular local trail, mentioning that Alex was new to the area and looking for recommendations. Again, a perfect, friendly, engaging opener. I did this for about 10 different women. Each message was personalized, referencing something specific from their profile. It took me the better part of an hour. I put my phone down, confident that I'd soon have a flurry of interesting replies. A few hours passed. I checked my phone. Nothing. Not a single reply. Okay, I thought. That's weird. But it's a weekday evening. People are busy. They'll reply later. The next morning, I checked again. One reply. It was from a girl whose bio just said, "Don't be boring." I had sent her a message with a lighthearted joke. Her reply, in its entirety, was, "Haha." That was it. No question back. No follow-up. Just, haha. What was I supposed to do with that? I tried to keep the conversation going. I asked her what she was up to that day. She replied about 4 hours later, "Work." This was confusing. I was presenting her with a handsome, interesting guy, and this was all the effort she was willing to put in? Meanwhile, none of the other 9 women I'd messaged had replied at all. I decided I just needed a bigger sample size. I spent my lunch break that day messaging another 20 matches. Again, I personalized everything. I complimented a travel photo. I asked about a pet. I commented on a book I saw on a shelf in one of their pictures. I was a master conversationalist. The results were staggering, but not in the way I expected. Of those 20 new messages, I got 3 replies. One was "DFX." One was "LOL nice." The third asked Alex how tall he was. I paused. I hadn't thought about that. The guy in the photos was obviously tall. I just wrote back 6 feet 3 inches. She replied almost instantly, "Cool. What do you do for work?" I told her he was a graphic designer. She never replied again. By the end of the second day, I had messaged close to 50 women. I had hundreds of matches waiting, and my conversations were all completely dead on arrival. I started to notice patterns that I, as a woman on these apps, had never really paid attention to. So many bios were just lists of demands. Be funny. Be interesting. Be over 6 feet. Have your life together. Must be able to host. And the most common one, be able to hold a conversation. The irony was burning a hole in my screen. These women were demanding a skill that they themselves demonstrated zero capacity for. I was getting frustrated. I showed Stephen that evening. I complained that no one was talking back to Alex. He just gave me this knowing little smile, not a mean one, a tired one, and he said, "I know." That just made me more determined. I thought maybe my approach is wrong. Maybe being thoughtful and engaging isn't what they want. So I changed tactics. I tried being more direct, more flirty. I sent a girl a message saying her smile was amazing. She replied, "I know." I tried being funnier. I sent clever puns related to their names or bios. Most didn't reply. The ones who did usually sent back the crying, laughing emoji, and that was it. My entire evenings were now consumed by this experiment. I would sit on the couch after my classes, swiping and messaging as Alex for hours. It felt like a job, a really, really bad job where you're a telemarketer trying to sell a product that no one wants, even though the product is objectively great. The product, in this case, being a conversation with a handsome, successful, and interesting man. I was doing all the work. I was the initiator, the question asker, the entertainer, the one trying to breathe life into a conversation with a corpse. I would ask a girl a question about herself. She'd give a short, one-sentence answer, and then nothing. Silence. Waiting for me to ask the next question, like I was a journalist interviewing a reluctant celebrity. I never got asked questions back. No one seemed curious about Alex at all. They seemed to view him as a potential source of validation or entertainment, and if he didn't provide it in the first few messages, he was discarded. The sheer volume of matches meant nothing. They were just a collection of faces that represented a black hole for my time and effort. One time, I actually got a conversation going. A girl actually asked Alex a question back. We exchanged maybe 10 messages. I was thrilled. I thought, this is it. I'm breaking through. Then, in the middle of the conversation, she just stopped replying. For no reason. I looked back at our messages. I hadn't said anything weird. It was just over. She had gotten bored and moved on. I was feeling things I did not expect to feel. I was feeling dejected. I was feeling insecure. I was feeling angry. And it wasn't even me. It was a fake person. But the constant rejection, the constant feeling of being ignored and dismissed, it was getting to me. I finally understood what Stephen meant when he called it soul-crushing. He wasn't being dramatic. It really was. You put yourself out there, you make an effort, and 99% of the time you are met with absolute, profound indifference. I remembered my conversations with my friends. We'd sit around and show each other our own apps, laughing at the terrible opening lines from guys, screenshotting the awkward messages. We'd complain that men didn't put in enough effort, and now I saw why. Why would you spend 20 minutes crafting a beautiful, personalized message when the most likely outcome is either no reply or a LOL? After a while, you'd be beaten down into just sending hey to everyone, because the return on investment for effort was practically zero. The 2-week deadline for the bet was approaching. Stephen's profile had accumulated a grand total of 3 matches, 1 bot, 1 ghost, and 1 girl who unmatched him after he said he worked in IT zero dates. Alex's profile had over 1,000 matches. I had personally initiated conversations with over 200 of them, and I had not secured a single date. I hadn't even gotten a phone number. The longest conversation I had was about 15 messages before it fizzled into nothing. The experiment was a catastrophic failure, but in the opposite way I had intended. It was the final night of the bet. I was sitting in the living room just staring at my phone. I felt defeated. I hadn't just lost a bet. It felt like a fundamental part of my worldview had been shattered. The world I saw in my textbooks, the one with clear lines of power and privilege, was far more complicated and messy on a personal level. Stephen came in and sat down in the armchair across from me. He wasn't holding his phone or a game controller. He just sat there. He asked very gently, "So, steakhouse tomorrow?" I didn't even have the energy to be annoyed. I just shook my head and looked at him. I think it was the first time I'd looked at him without judgment in months. I told him I didn't get it. I told him I had this profile of a perfect guy, and I couldn't get anyone to have a normal conversation. I said, "It's like they don't want to talk. They just want to be admired or entertained. It's exhausting. I spent hours and hours on this." He listened patiently until I was done ranting. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he just nodded slowly. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't gloat. He didn't even smile. He just said, "Yeah, that's what it's like. It's a second job, and you don't get paid. The interview process is brutal, and your coworkers treat you like you're invisible." He continued, "That's why I don't do it. It's not that I hate women. It's not that I don't want a girlfriend. It's that I don't have the energy for that, for the void. I'd rather be happy alone than miserable, trying to get someone's attention." The void? That word again? But now I understood it. I had stared into it for a week. I had gotten a tiny glimpse into the sheer, crushing demoralization of modern dating for an average man, and that was with a top-tier fake profile. I couldn't even imagine what it was like for a normal guy like my brother. I didn't say anything else. I just nodded. I opened my phone, went to the settings on Alex's profile, and deleted it permanently. The bet was never mentioned again. The steakhouse was forgotten. More importantly, I stopped lecturing him. I stopped calling him an incel. I stopped trying to fix him. Our relationship got better, almost overnight. It was like a wall of my own making had come down. We started talking more, like we used to when we were kids. A few weeks later, something happened that sealed it for me. I was on my own Tinder account, the one I barely used. I got a notification, a new message. I opened it. It was from a perfectly normal-looking guy. The message said, "Hey." My first instinctual reaction was to roll my eyes, the lack of effort. But then I stopped. I thought about the hundreds of messages I had sent as Alex, the effort, the personalization, the wit, and the crushing silence I got in return. I understood that hey wasn't necessarily laziness. It was a defense mechanism. It was a white flag. It was the result of being worn down. Stephen walked into the room at that moment. He saw me looking at my phone. I turned the screen to him, showing him the message. He looked at it, then looked at me. And we both just shared this look. A look of complete and total understanding. I still believe in the things I study. I still think there are big systemic issues in society. But I also learned that day that sometimes the map is not the territory. Theories are clean, but real life is messy. And my brother isn't an incel. He's just a guy who decided his time and his sanity were worth more than playing a game he could never win. I was so wrong about him. And I'm glad I was stupid enough to make that bet, because I finally got to understand my own brother.